All right, broadcast has started. Okay, everybody, introduce yourselves real quick. I'm Michael Rogers.
I'm Jeremiah Fitzgerald, aka Fishrock123.
I'm Sean We Met, aka Snowstorm.
I'm Trent Oswald, aka the Rebel Robot.
I'm Zeke, aka Zeke.
Cool. Okay. All right. So the first thing on the agenda is some of the governance stuff, and really just a whole section about like what kinds of things where we might diverge from the policy that the main io.js project has. So the first one is just governance. So like essentially the governance policy that io.js has, we would just swap out the term TC for a working group, and everything would just be the website working group. And you know it sort of goes hand in hand with their contribution policy, where it's a pretty liberal contribution policy, and doesn't do anything significant get added. Is there any reason why we wouldn't want to do sort of like a consensus-seeking model for this, or want to take on some other kind of governance structure?
I guess I would say that the consensus-driven model is another word for design by committee, which tends to be a bit noisy, and there's a lot more conversation than actual productivity at times, but that's mostly just devil's advocate point of view.
Yeah, I was definitely worried about that. Like, I mean, even in the work that's been done so far, I was worried that that's where we would end up drifting to. But from what I've seen so far, it's like, if there's a good design, everybody's like, yay, and we're sort of pushing in this like positive direction. I mean, the interesting thing about consensus seeking, rather than like a pure consensus model, is that it sort of de-incentivizes people from objecting for no reason. Like saying no to things and just like coming up with random reasons not to do something is sort of de-incentivized because you've got to convince everybody else that you're also right, because it could just go down to a vote. And maybe we get more liberal about votes if people end up joining that are a little bit more contrarian. But I mean, it's been working well for the io.js TC. It's sort of what we've been doing by de facto so far. I mean, I'm inclined to just adopt it and say, look, we have the same policy as the main project, and then we can come back to this in like a month, and if we're seeing some problems with it, then we can alter it. I mean, we own the governance policy.
Yeah, it seems good to keep stuff sort of in line. I'm not sure how the streams sort of working group is handling their thing, because like if everything is all using like the same governance model and stuff, then no one's going to be confused about what's what and who's leading what. The only main thing about the website is the possibility that we don't need to be like as strict about things, because it's not like we're shipping this software that may not be upgraded in the future or unable to be as easily or in certain situations or whatever.
Right. I mean, every commit is a release, right? Like we're not like gathering up all the stuff behind the release.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing, so about the streams working group, I don't know how they're handling it yet, but they do have an extra little bit of complexity in that if they wanted to do something like break API compatibility, they would like really need to get the core TC to sign off on that, right? Like they don't have the amount of autonomy that they have is a little bit different than what we have, I think. So.
See, and I think there are some things that can be like a good analogy for a release, like a large change to the build process could be seen as an API change. It could end up making it a lot difficult for each of us to hop on and make sure things are functioning properly. And so that may be a good argument to actually have releases, but again, that's something we can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, if we want to structure it as a release, that we could do that. So far, I mean, what we've been doing with build, right, is that we just collaborate with the build team when they're doing their own release, right? And then we get everything in line along with them. And that collaboration so far has been pretty seamless and seems to work. And so I'm hesitant to change it in the short term. but we may need to change that, more in the future, or just, get the web, make sure that the website group is well aware of what's going on with the releases, so that if there's anything that's going to if they want to do a release and they have to wait because of the website, that's going to piss them off. It's going to piss everybody off. I think we can figure that out later. Okay, so coming back to this, so we have the governance policy, the license, the contributing documentation. For those three, any objections at all to just taking io.js for now? So we'd be MIT licensed, we'd have the same contribution policy, we'd have the same governance policy.
Say io.js was not previously copyrighted by Joint, who would the copyright currently be going to? So that's mostly what my issue is about. We can relicense the website as MIT. I can do that. ISC is basically the same thing, but
ISC isn't quite as permissive. So in terms of ownership, every individual contributor owns their contribution. So ownership is actually spread out. And right now, there's no license granted to an independent institution. The only reason that we would want to do that in the future is if we felt like we might need to enforce the license for some reason. So if it was ISC, there actually is a bit of enforcement that we may want to do in the future. If it's MIT, that's not really a big deal. The whole joint ownership licensing thing is a little complicated because they. Oh wait, hold on. This is my laundry coming in. Hold on one second.
Re-CN, I'm not sure if Michael's taking minutes. Otherwise, I assume not. We can watch it afterwards and take minutes. I think that's what Rod has been doing to some extent for the regular meetings.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, at this point, we don't have the document going, and it's just easier for everyone to pay attention if there's somebody, you're not trying to write as you listen. Okay.
I think Rod's just been doing it just to be official or something. It doesn't matter too much.
What was this? Oh yeah, I was totally gonna ask somebody to be the note taker, and then I forgot. So I guess that means that I have to go back through the video and then write notes out when this is over. That's what I just did to myself.
Well, we could start now. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, we need to send out a link real fast to take notes.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm just going with the agenda that's in the GitHub issue and just kind of knocking down each one. And then after this, at some point over the next day, I'll go through each of these tickets and update them as well. And so since I'm doing that, I might as well just write up the notes. Okay, so back to the license. So the whole thing with the joint thing on the main license, that was just because there was usually you can just say the contributors own their work. But there was this weird thing where Joyent actually bought Ryan's copyright for a bunch of stuff, and they actually paid for work to hire by a couple people, including Bert and Ben in the early days, and they specifically wanted it licensed to them for some reason. And then individually from that, separate from that, there's also a CLA that doesn't transfer ownership of individuals' contributions, but it does grant Joyent this license. And then they got rid of the CLA, so there's this extra layer of complexity. But for this, we actually don't need to worry about it. We can just MIT license it, and it's owned by the individual contributors, and then we're good. Okay. All right. So team structure.
Hey, Michael, I just have one question on that.
Yeah.
Did you talk about the certificate of origin?
No, I didn't. But we should add that because there's no reason not to add it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, we should adopt that from core.
Yeah. All right. So does somebody who has been working with this team one a little bit more want to take this one on, the team structure issue? I guess nobody is familiar with this. Okay.
I'm
I think Sean was doing a lot with it.
Yeah, we jumped through to a new point really fast there. I wasn't mentally ready. So I guess there's there's a few parts of this to me. There's the team structure, and then in the last few hours we have this sort of idea for a second team to promote or evangelize the project. But also we've had the mention of docs come up as well in a past issue. So I think that might be loosely related. I guess.
On the doc point, just as a tangent, just want to throw it out there that we'd be happy to redirect all the docs.nodejitsu.com URLs to whatever new doc site we create. It gets a lot of hits. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. I don't know. My sort of initial gut feeling with organizing is maybe that the volunteers who are interested take on certain domains of interest. So if you're really interested in, I don't know, getting the guide section up and running or the build process or something, we can all take on little areas of concern at the beginning and not be maybe as concerned with larger formalities at this point. I think the sort of ad hoc way we've been doing things has actually been working pretty well. The only question I think there will be in the long run is we've talked about sort of like project owners, and we might need that in the scope of the website, and also maybe this new topic that's come up in terms of general promotion outside of the website. But I don't know. Somebody want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, so if we, like, the main reason that we've been creating these working groups so far, and the website is the first one to really, like, have a meeting like this, although Build has been going really strong for a long time. I just don't think that they've done, like, a hangout yet, but they definitely have their own group. And the reason that, Build is a separate group from Core is to grant them autonomy. Like, people should feel comfortable taking on more ownership over there, and they should be the kind of people that maybe don't want to contribute to Core. And I think that's definitely true of the website. And I think that we want to, continue to grant that autonomy. The reason that I brought up the evangelism thing is that, we already see sort of the separation between conversations related to messaging and conversations related to, like, the website, how it functions, and what, like, what build process that we use and what the design looks like. And just in the last week, we've taken on so many of these new goddamn, like, social media tools and stuff for promotion, and we want the messaging to be, uniform across those. So that's why I wanted to sort of spin up this little evangelism team so that it's not just me updating the Google Plus page by myself, because that's not sustainable. But at the same time, like, if we start to go down a track with the messaging that we all decide is, interesting, we want the website to reflect it. We want, like, what we say on Twitter to reflect it. We don't want it to be, like, totally random in different places. Like, it's confusing enough that we have a fork of Node. Like, let's not make it more confusing by having all these differing messages. Also, like, this, like, there's a lot of really good people now working on the website. I was sort of, like, given the facilitator role, I think, like, a week ago, just to get some organization around stuff. Like, I would love to hand that over to one of y'all, so that you guys can sort of drive these meetings and drive the issues, and I can pull back. Because I'm not that interested in maintaining the website, and I certainly am terrible with design, and nobody should trust me with it. So it would be great to have people more qualified in that role. And I can, just focus on the messaging and build out the sort of evangelism side as well.
I guess maybe to bring some focus to this. Oh, sorry, I saw you on mute, Trent. Would be maybe a quick tally of the group of who thinks, like, maybe promotion and websites still belong together in the short term versus having, like, another group that meets, like, yet again, while we don't really have a strong base of volunteers, or if we think we should just get the ball rolling on that right away. I'd be interested to see the initial opinions on that and then build out from there, because that sort of maybe changes how much we need to talk about promotion in the scope of this meeting.
I agree with that, but I want to phrase it a little differently. So I want to ask, is anybody else here interested in updating the Facebook page?
No.
I guess I could do it if
Like, I
no
will
one else.
do it. Okay.
If no one else has taken it, I can do it if needed.
Isn't that to some degree why we also have the ability to just make multiple administrators? I mean, obviously, I think at the end of the day, there has to be somebody who has a little bit of ownership to make sure that messaging gets out there, but I think it's also helpful to empower several of us to be able to do some of the basics around that as well at this stage.
Well,
And we
so
can also...
the account management and access controls for that stuff is like kind of complicated, right? Like it's not just a GitHub repo. So there's some added complexity there that I'm gonna have to take on, no matter what, no matter which group sort of like runs with it. But like, my initial feeling was that, people who are, working on the website and really enjoying that probably don't want to take responsibility for updating Facebook, and that there's probably a bunch of people out there that really want to update Facebook, but like don't want to get emails about the website build process. Right.
I mean, there are people that work on the website, and then there are people that write copy for the website, which I think is a distinction that is important. And the people who would want to write copy are probably going to want to write the copy on the Facebook page to make it consistent. So maybe there's just like a copywriter role within this working group that kind of makes sense, and then that person, whoever it is, excuse me, would go out and update that copy elsewhere, because you do kind of need somebody to own your editorial voice, or else it's going to, just by the nature of how people write differently, be different.
Right. I mean, I think the way that I see it working is somewhat like build. Build is going to dictate what build does, but there's a collaboration between build and the website team in making sure that everything gets updated at the same time. And now once we automate this more, it's going to be even more connected. And then there would be the same kind of collaboration with the evangelism side, where evangelism is building the copy that goes into the website and coordinating and collaborating with the website team to get that updated. And also eventually with translators. Okay, cool.
I tend to agree with Sean. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Trent.
No, you're
I don't
fine.
agree with that, but I mean, when there's like 3 or 4 people to be that team, I would see that as a logical progression of what we're doing right now. So I tend to agree with Sean on just like, when we have those people and we need to make that separation, we should. But I just don't see, unless there are already 4 or 5 people.
No, I think I actually do have those people. I should have been more clear with that. I do have people that I'm going to grab and make them help me update the Facebook page.
Yeah, I mean, if there are other people that don't want to be on this meeting, then yeah, totally, that makes sense. But if it's just trying to, split the group of who are on this call, then no.
Okay, cool. I'll follow up in the ticket.
Okay.
And we'll build it out a little more, and if it reaches a kind of critical mass, then we'll go. Well, I'm going to let Trent speak, though.
I was just going to say I agree with Sean on that. Yeah, if you've already got people in mind for it, that makes more sense to be able to hand that off to him, because I do think there is a separation between, the build process, the bringing the website up, and the copy of it. So yeah.
Cool. All right.
Well, I guess we're going to follow this up on the ticket, so maybe we'll table it for now. But is the general consensus then we find these volunteers, but they sort of are, at least for the time being, just considered part of the website team, even if they don't they don't necessarily have to sit on this meeting all the time, because that's not necessarily their concern. But you might have one interested volunteer from that group who does come to represent the social media efforts or whatever that's going on.
So what I'm going to do is I'll follow up in the ticket, but I'll start to build out the tooling and share it with the people that are interested, and then I'm going to bring it into the main TC meeting to get buy-off on the idea of it. From there, I'll reach out to a few people, and what I expect to have happen actually is a few pretty non-technical people to show up and want to be involved in that, and I think that'll dictate okay, now I'll spin up a different repo and we'll split it at that point. But yeah, it'll stay basically the evangelism subgroup or whatever will stay in that ticket until it's not.
That sounds like a good plan.
Okay, cool.
Do we have more to discuss just in terms of general team structure, or have we kind of figured out that things are working well as they are? I'm not sure if we came to a settlement on part 2.
At the end of this, I'm going to ask if somebody else wants to be the facilitator, but that's the last kind of point of order. Okay, so IRC. So right now we're in the main IRC channel. One thing that I haven't brought up yet is that there's a website that's like IRC, nodeirc.info. And a lot of people get linked to this, and I think it's even linked from Nodejs.com and stuff like that. And it's just sort of like an introduction to hey, where do I go for stuff, and what's the code of conduct, and blah blah blah. And I saw this guy like a week ago at SF Node, and he was send me a PR so that we can get the io.js channel on this. So I think we may end up getting like the io.js channel sort of in this document as well. So that'll be pretty cool. I thought that was relevant, so I thought I'd bring it up.
In terms of IRC, I would like it if io.js can be like more about either discussing like core or like broader issues, and not so much about just questions, because Node.js, the Node.js channel is very much like people just come in and ask questions about it, and that kind of floods out other things. So I'm not sure if it's a good idea to make a distinction there, but that's kind of what I've leaned to.
Well, we could make like something like an io.js help channel.
Well, no, I don't want to fracture the community like that, right? Like people looking for Node help are looking for io.js help. So let's leave Node.js in that. Node.js, like the channel hasn't been about core development for a long time. Core development was in #libuv, and now a lot of that has actually moved to the io.js channel. I think that libuv is like pretty. It's not about libuv, unfortunately, a lot of the time. But it is. I mean, there's some activity in there. I just think that right now it's less active than the io.js channel. Okay, cool. Next point of order, closing/fixing policy.
Before we move on to the next thing, I believe there was an issue somewhere that was linked to IRC about adding. Right, so the issue we have linked to the IRC thing is to replace in our, I guess, links Freenode web chat with something called scrollback, which is like a different IRC client, because the Freenode web client is not very good.
I think this one we could experiment with and vote on the ticket. I don't think there's any rush to change it at this point.
I'm +1. That Freenode thing is terrible.
Yeah, if it's better, I think we can just all like come to that conclusion offline. I do not feel qualified in having reviewed that other solution to even discuss it.
Yeah, we should probably table this one for now.
Okay. All right. Okay, so closing/fixing policy. So this is, we need a policy for closing and fixing PRs that have merge conflicts. Yeah, this has been happening a lot. Like, I mean, are people comfortable just saying, like, you know, if there's a merge conflict, they're still just going to try to do it themselves and get it in? Or are we going to kick it back to the contributors every time?
So my policy, that's my personal sort of policy on these sort of things when I'm like dealing with issues and stuff, is very much from like Express and Doug Wilson, and it's basically that we shouldn't make the people who are trying to contribute do like everything. If it's not too much to like to fix merge conflicts or to rebase it or whatever, to just do that, or if there's like small nitpicks instead of just being, well, you need to fix these nitpicks, that we just go and we just, you know, clean it up and be done with it. It's a lot easier if you don't use the GitHub merge button, but rather like do something like cherry pick or git am the commit.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like right now, because it's happening so often, like we should just take responsibility for it, and then hopefully in the future, I think once we have the build process and things are like a bit more, like here's this config file with these lines and things are more separated, that we'll probably see less of these in the future anyway.
I agree with.
I have an intermediate policy that I just missed. I lean toward you are saying, Jeremiah, with regards to just cleaning up the nitpicks. But if you just ask people to fix it before you do that, you might identify the people who are sort of more engaged than those who are sort of throwing what they want over the fence. You know, so you say, hey, can you fix this? You wait 72 hours if they haven't fixed it anyway. But this is a picture of who's more engaged than others, and maybe identify people who you should be reaching out to so they clearly are paying attention.
Yeah, I agree that it's always good to talk to people on issues when possible.
If anything, to just thank them at the end, even if you you end up closing it. I don't know, if I've been closing them, I've been trying to remember that. Oh yeah, by the way, thanks for fixing that spelling mistake.
Yeah, that's key.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm +1 on the general idea of, I don't know, if it takes me about as much time to fix the PR as to send the person a message, it's it just makes sense to fix it sometimes.
Okay, I think that we're good here. So the helping users properly report website bug stuff. So I don't think that we actually are in a disagreement about that. Everybody is like, yes, we should have that somewhere on the site. We just need to see, I think, a pull request on what that looks like and the best way to expose it, right? There's nothing contentious about this bug.
The main thing is just like for general navigation on the site, just not to clutter it and to make it like something where it's clear where they need to go in the navigation to get to what. And it's just something we need to think about more. I
think there's two parts to that as well. There's like linking people back to the repo, and I think the actual 55 that's linked there is referring to when people report issues in the main GitHub repo and just communicating what the processes are around that. Maybe even the README should mention something to that effect, like the io.js README. I'm not sure.
Well, the thing is, like the website links to the GitHub issues. Its issues button links to the issues on core, and so people have just been going there and reporting just issues there.
I think this is really easy on the not front page. So like in the FAQ and in other places, like we can just have a thing at the bottom or even at the top that says like any inaccuracies or problems with this, report here, right? It's very clear that it's that page because it has content in it. But the front page is just all about the main io.js project and the releases, and so it's kind of hard to be like, here's the issues, here's where you report issues about like this thing that you're downloading, as opposed to the way that this website looks.
My magic wish for the future build process, especially once we get a guide or article section, because I think that's, and the facts and pages like that are going to be the ones that we're most concerned with, people being able to fix our mistakes in as empowered of a way as possible, would be to even have like the section headers have little like hyperlinks beside them that if you click on it, it sends you to that Markdown file on GitHub, right to that section, if that makes sense. Because in theory, I think we're all agreed that this is going to be powered by Markdown, and it shouldn't be that hard to, because I've seen other documentation in open source projects do it where you essentially click over and then you're able to fix it right there in the GitHub editor, which is helpful.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I think that transitions actually into our next section, which is all the build and stuff like that. So in the interest of making this meeting not go over time, more holistically, so we need to pick a build system. It needs to handle internationalization. It needs to dynamically build these download pages. It needs to have a blog, and it needs to have some kind of automated way of pulling out release data, although we can probably punt on RSS for now if we just like have a JSON feed or something. People have opinions about build systems. Go.
Gulp. That would be the first thing I would say, is we want to make sure that we have something that's easy to manage and has a large community base to be able to handle what it is that we're trying to build. And I think Gulp is a really good solution for that. It's got a really small learning curve and is something that's easy enough for anyone to look at the current Gulp file to see how it's working.
Mainly, we don't need something that's like too complicated. Although it's something like Gulp is fine in its scope and stuff for this. But basically, we should keep this simple enough that people can contribute to it, while still powerful enough that we can, of course, do everything with it. And if possible, so long as it's not, again, too complicated, we should go for something that goes, that we all feel, and maybe even like core feels, goes in the direction that's sort of the way the project's best practices sort of go towards. I also like Gulp, but I'm not too particular.
So I have a few questions about the way the website is built now. Is there any specific reason that it needs to be a static website? Like, could it be a Node app? Do we need to be able to like compile it into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that we will distribute somehow, or can it just be like a dynamic app?
the idea about static is that we're not using, like, not static in the sense that we're going to be writing out HTML pages and committing those to the repo. Like, for releases, we need to have something that's not tied to the repo, so that the build system can just build it, and it can take whatever release data is in there and make those pages. But something that doesn't, it's not like a web app. It's just building HTML pages. It doesn't need like Angular or any of these fancy things.
Sure. I guess what I'm getting at is, so if we have like a service that a web service that dishes out version numbers and stuff like that, I would assume that would be a separate thing. So do we want this website to be? I understand what you said about pre-processing and stuff like that. Like, well, obviously, we're not going to be writing HTML files, but is there any specific reason that we need to compile it into or transpile it into a static website?
So the current process that pulls it out is really simple and just serves static assets. I think it's pretty trivial to update that to run a gulp script and then serve out the static assets generated by the gulp script. So I don't think that we have to check in the HTML files that get built. I'm pretty confident that build can do something else. But what I don't think that we want to move to, right, is like a Express app that dynamically creates these web resources, and then host that Express app and update and like bounce it on deployment and do all of that kind of stuff, like keeping it a bit simpler. I mean, any people are free to object, but I feel like those are our current constraints.
So why are you adverse to that, Michael?
I'm adverse to it because having worked with like a lot of designers that are much more confident working on something that they just build and then look at static assets locally and aren't running a local server and then looking at the assets to the server and figuring out how the page gets generated and all of that. Like, if things are just in these directories and they're these really easily accessible resources and I just run the script and then I get an HTML page out of it, it's easier. It's easier for everybody to contribute to, really. I mean, the more that you sort of hide the logic on how the page gets built in like routes and other random JavaScript files, the harder that it gets to contribute to. Especially people that just want to come and update a sentence or change some spelling somewhere.
Well, the thing with that is we can make something that's a little bit more complex on the build and the server and have it pull from something like GitHub for the copy. And so I've built a number of different websites where I've had it pull blog posts from a repo and just statically serve up whatever's in that repo. And so if we are building out a copy team, that may be something we may want to look into for that, because then someone who's non-technical whatsoever can go into the GitHub repo and update the copy for the website.
I think.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, I feel like there's if somebody wants to contribute, they should be able to like run npm install and npm start, and that would be like the process that you would go through to get the thing running, regardless of whether it was a static website or a dynamic website. And there are things that kind of suck about static websites, like let's say we needed to, if we had redirects in the page and we renamed some page, we have no way to like dynamically route that to some other page. We have to put in like a meta tag that refreshes.
Keep in mind that the build is running Nginx that runs all this stuff, and that, like, if there is anything like that we need to do, we can just have Nginx, serve, go to our 404 page or home or whatever.
So that actually leads me to another question I had, which is like, I don't really understand how all the pieces fit together and where the site is hosted. So, like, as a contributor, I worry, like, am I stepping on the dist directory? Like, how does the dist directory actually become part of the website? It seems a bit fragmented. And then ultimately, who has the keys to like deploy the thing, and where, like, on what host is it deployed? Is this documented anywhere?
It is only documented in the loosely in the pull request that created it, which is actually probably a good item we should open. I have a little thing in the chat with it we should open, so I'm just going to type that as for README how it works. So what's happening right now, from my understanding of it, we have, I think it's on SliceHost, a web service that actually is all run by, I can't think of what the service is called. It's like Chef. But anyway, there's like, it's a programmatically managed server that's managed by the build team. And they can go in there and modify the script, for example, which causes various things on the server to happen. So for example, for the dist folder, that's not maintained by a repo in any way. That's something that on the build team side, within the hosting environment and with Nginx, etc., their scripts populate that folder. So we don't really have to worry about that folder at all. It's completely outside of the scope of our repo. What does happen is if I do a git push right now into the master repo, there's actually a webhook that GitHub fires to that server that says, hey, the repo changed. And then that triggers a script that the build team made that basically pulls the repo, and because index.html changed and we're just serving static files, that new index.html just appears about 20 seconds later after you hit git push. Now, once we start talking about adding a build process, so something like gulp that's going to be generating the static assets, then most likely what's going to happen is as part of that git hook, when it pulls the new repo, it's going to have to run gulp or a gulp task distribute or something like that, which would, update the local static assets. I don't know, is this helping kind of explain how it's all actually in the build project, which we can talk about offline maybe.
Sure, yeah, this is totally helping. Just coming to this project without a really holistic view of how all the pieces fit together, it's been kind of hard for me to know. Once you make a commit to the website, how does it actually get deployed, and with what other sort of projects does it mingle along the way? I think that should be more clear.
Is it possible that we could actually bring that git hook script into this repo? Because that script is so intimately intertwined with how we're deploying this, it might be a good idea to move it into the website repo itself.
We should, if it's possible. It may not be because of the way that build might be distributing it is through their repo. But if it's not, then we should at least link to it in the README, right? So that if you're curious about it, you can just pull that up. So trying to bring a little bit more focus to this back to sort of figuring out which build process that we use. Internationalization is pretty hard and kind of a problem, and I've used some pretty poor tooling before and seen pretty poor tooling. Part of me feels like the difference between grunt and gulp and whatever other thing that we want to pull in is relatively minor. And the difference between basically strategies for internationalization is probably going to be much larger. So I'm wondering if it makes sense to look at the options for doing the internationalization side of it and then letting that drive the decision and the conversation about build. What do you guys think?
I was thinking we could have different directories from Markdown files that only those would actually have the content, and that would maybe be translated or whatever, and that can just be built into whatever pages we're serving. I'm not 100% familiar with internationalization strategies for websites and stuff, but
well, at first it seems really simple. You're yeah, I have this key that corresponds to a string, and the string, we have the keys in different languages. But then, as soon as you start to inject variables into the strings that you're translating, you have to sort of create some kind of templating language around that. And there are tools, there are a bunch of Node tools to do that, but we'd have to kind of pick one. An example would be there are 2 new releases, and the 2 is a dynamic number that has to be injected into the template. So I have a little bit of experience with that. Yeah, there's definitely more than meets the eye.
My leaning would be to keep it simple, stupid at the beginning. I think, and this will bite us eventually if we're not well organized. My naive assumption would be we could we could split the internationalization in two ways. So obviously we have sort of our shell, our really basic, lacking much design frame of a website right now, and links like frequently asked questions, documentation. Those those strings would need to be substituted. And the only really highly dynamic page beyond that I see would be anything relating to downloads or the home page where we have like a download version and are switching words like changelog. Beyond that, I think for the actual frequently asked questions page and any guide or article section we're going to build later on, how I would just approach that would be for each language, there is a different Markdown file. And then so if you're in the /en, you get all the English articles and guides, and if you're in /fr, you get all the French guides, etc. The problem there long run is, if somebody updates the facts in English, then you need process around making sure that those changes propagate to your other 13 facts languages, and that's where it's going to get really tricky for us.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably look at how some other projects have dealt with that. I agree that we sort of need to separate things that are templated from things that are content, and approach them a little differently. I do think, though, that the front website should just be entirely templatized, because if it's a mix of content and templating, it's just going to be even more complicated. So like the string, ES6, bringing ES6 to the Node community, that can just be one string template that we swap out or whatever. But especially if we make a change to messaging and we want to make sure that we get all the translations in there, or just for building the page, it's just going to be really complicated if it's 3 Markdown files and this JSON file somewhere else. So. Okay, does somebody feel comfortable sort of taking on internationalization tooling as research and just updating that issue with the different tools and approaches, and then from there we can decide on a build system?
Yeah, I can do that. We're actually sort of doing that on the NPM website now, and it's in its infancy. We just started basically by picking out, basically yanking strings out of the code and putting them into a JSON file, and that was the first step, right? So even if we don't have any real internationalization yet, we're at least setting the trend of putting these various strings in a common place. So I have to solve that problem anyway for npmjs.com, so might as well take some of that stuff and apply it to io.js too.
I CC'd Arya into the internal, however you pronounce it, issue, and because I know she does a lot of stuff with that, and I'm sure she'd be able to, and be willing to help us a bit with that too.
Great.
See, and that links really closely to how we're going to end up doing copy in general, and so maybe we should be also looking into how we want to store copy and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think what once we have something set up, what we're gonna learn really quickly is what process works and doesn't work for getting getting translators to update, and working with the translators to sort of stage updates and stuff like that. And I think that will actually end up informing how we build out the copy more than anything, or a copy system that people would be updating outside of everything else. Okay, so coming back to the agenda real quick. Yeah.
Just as a final thought on this, my vote on approaching internationalization would be, we should have as we're doing the build process, we should have a rough idea of how it's going to work. So as we build the build process, we should be using some of those strings and sort of have that English prefix already existing. I would be hesitant to start accepting internationalization content earlier than we're ready process-wise.
I agree.
Yeah,
I just think that we need to get there really fast.
And we should test it. And I hate to sort of turn away willing translator volunteers, but I think we should get our base of content started and figure out even how we do blogs and how we do a guide section and all that stuff. I think in some ways is more important in the early days to figure out, while at the same time having a little bit of that internationalization snuck in there so that we're not having to reinvent the wheel.
I agree.
At the same time, I would like to get build going so that we can have dynamically updating releases and not have to worry about stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
build
so-
first.
Okay, so quick question for Zeke then. So in the research that you've done so far, is there any limitation? So say we went with Gulp or Grunt or any other thing that people have mentioned. Are there limitations on the internationalization tooling that we can use? And are there anything that we should just cut out from consideration right now?
No, I don't think the build or automation tool that we choose is going to be a deal breaker for this. And I tend to agree with Sean about how we should go about starting this project and paving the way with English and see how far we can get there. And like you said earlier, we should regroup next week.
Cool. Okay. I'd like to just get moving on the build stuff so that people that are interested can sort of have at it. I think that at this point, yes, everybody has opinions. So who here has both cycles to work on the build stuff and familiarity with one that they would like to go with?
I do.
Probably myself and Trent, mostly it seems.
I would like to. I'm a little too busy this week, but I'm happy to review those PRs.
Okay, and your guys' choice would be Gulpton?
I'm familiar enough with it to be able to do something. I think it's better than Grunt in most cases like this. So
Agreed.
+1.
That's fine with me.
All right, cool, awesome. We're moving that forward. Okay. So I think I'm gonna table the downloads and blog announcement stuff because I think we all agree that we need to do it, and it's just a matter of implementing it with the new blog process, right?
Well, I want to ask one thing about that.
Okay.
So by downloads, you mean like releases of io.js?
Yeah,
Yes.
so we still have the thing on the front page, right? But the front page is like only the latest unstable, and eventually probably the latest stable and the latest nightly, right?
Yeah.
So the front page isn't going to have more than 3, downloads on it. It would be cool to have a page that had, all of the releases and all of the download links.
Yeah, so if we're thinking that this is going to be a static website, it would be nice if there was some service we could hit that supported cores for fetching all that information and just doing it at the user's browser. So when I worked at Heroku, I created a service called semver.io that was specifically for finding out the available versions of Node. So you could say, give me all the versions of Node, or you could say, give me the version of Node that satisfies this Semver range. And we used it for doing builds, but it's used for all kinds of other things. And the person who now maintains that has already added io.js support. So I think if you go to semver.io/io.json or something like that, I'll pull up the link, but it basically has all the versions because it crawls the dist directory, or I don't quite know how it works, but it would be nice if that was completely, if there wasn't like this mystery meat process of a dist page being built outside of the website repo scope, because it kind of makes the maintainers of the website less able to control how it looks and the way it's rendered. I don't know if that presents an SEO concern, because then if we're rendering it, with an AJAX call, then browsers, crawlers aren't going to know about the release numbers.
I don't know. I mean, we have all the information on the front page. We mostly want things linked to the front page. I'm not worried about the SEO in a downloads page.
Okay.
I think there might be a mix long term though between sort of the downloads page and really like a well-nested structure of release notes. And for example, I don't know, I always like to link to that Firefox example where I can very clearly go into especially major versions and like see what happened on those versions and
Yeah,
so
actually, it reminds me.
But well, just going back to the point of avoiding the magic, I don't think we need to really bring in what the build team is doing in terms of populating the really technical looking folders. Like if I'm clicking to it and it's just a list of files, I'm perfectly happy to have that random dist folder happening on the build team side. What I think we can do to merge those efforts is, because we're going to be having this build process in place, we don't necessarily have to be scraping semver.io in real time. We could be using either their JSON feed or something from our build server, and basically pipe that into our existing Gulp build system. So as a local developer maintaining that page, let's say I want to tweak the CSS or the appearance of that page, I should be able to, it should generate for me just as the same as the build server will generate it. And I'm aware of how my changes impact that page. And I think looking at that template from a maintainer point of view, I would see that it's, bringing in some sort of variable called, I don't know, an array of major versions and then an array of minor versions or whatever. I think that would be very obvious once somebody's dynamically hooked up that page.
My concern there is that if it's a result of the build process, then you have to deploy the website every time a new version of io.js comes out.
But the build, what's nice in our case is the build process is essentially already the same environment in our case. We actually, like, that same server that's generating those raw looking directories right now on the dist folder, could be the same thing that just triggers our local server's gulp to run again after distribution scripts run, and automatically then the site would update. I think actually it would all work together quite well with the foundation they have in place once we add that build process step, which can just be run on the server.
Yeah,
well,
like we can have.
So I think actually what the easiest thing might be is that I'm pretty sure the build system already has an internal JSON object that has all this information in it. If post build, every time that they build, they check that in, like just have the build process check in like whatever the latest version is into the website, then we would automatically get a redeploy because there was a check-in. And you would have all of the when you clone that repo, you would have all of the resources that you need to build it, and it wouldn't be confusing.
That sounds pretty good.
That's an option. Like, I was thinking we'd have like a default sort of JSON file that it would read. There would be a mock of everything that could possibly be there, and like the real version would just point like an environment variable or send some other argument that just points it to a different JSON file that would build it, because it's always going to be the same structure. That one can't change anyways, because otherwise other tools would break on it. That was sort of the idea I had, but.
Well, we have lots of options, so I think we can, as the build process comes together, just figure it out.
Yeah, good call. Okay, so is there anything else that anybody wanted to cover specifically before we close out this meeting?
Yeah, I'm glad that Sean said that everybody is going to be writing Markdown. That's kind of one thing that I wanted to bring up. And I think actually Charlie kind of mentioned that too, that the people doing website design are not necessarily going to be the content contributors. So in my brief foray into working on the io.js website, I noticed that there was just this proliferation of HTML markup all over the place, and everyone had sort of their own idea of what the class names should be and what the content hierarchy should be. And I feel like we should sort of isolate that as much as possible and make sure that the majority of the meat is in Markdown files, and of course those limit the kind of markup that you can do, but of course Markdown is also just HTML, so if we need to override in certain places and write HTML tags into our Markdown, we can do that. I see a lot of people nodding, so I guess we're all on the same page on that.
Yeah, and the only thing that I was going to say is I've even done this thing where so if we're doing a blog, right, and then we need to sort the blog post by date. If you just make the first like H2 the date, you can actually in the build process just then pull that out and decode it and then do the ordering properly. It's like a really nice way to get around some of the complexity of like having a JSON object that just has this one piece of metadata in addition to the blog title and everything. So
yeah, the thing we're doing on the npm docs.npmjs.com, it's all it's all Markdown powered, and all the content is in Markdown. And we introduced this thing called HTML front matter, which is basically just an HTML comment at the beginning. It's like an alternative to YAML front matter that is not crazy YAML. It's just key value pairs. So we're doing things like that to control the order of content on certain pages, or to add, like this is a featured item, therefore it should show up on the home page, things like that.
That's really cool. All right. Okay. I think it's just time for everybody to get to work now. Great meeting.
So, well, we were on things we might want to add to the meeting, or maybe this is just a topic for next week or whenever we convene again. But I think one thing we're going to have to figure out, there's the build process side of it, but there's also going to be sort of the branding and design direction as well. And this sort of ties into what Zeke was talking about with even standardizing CSS and stuff to a certain degree. But as soon as we start breaking it down into Markdown files and then build process and then templates, I don't know. We're going to be building more and more content up. I think in terms of the user feel of io.js.org, I think it might be good to have somebody who takes that on as a project as well. And again, we don't necessarily have to talk about this now because we're running long, but I think before our 5 week from now release, if we're doing this, I don't know if we're doing the 6 week thing tied to V8, but in my head, if we have about 5 more weeks to maybe get a whole bunch of buzz again, and it would be nice to have a little more of a slick design and more comprehensive homepage, below the fold, that sort of thing.
Sure, I'm happy to help try to make that happen.
Yeah, I think also we're going to attract more people that are interested in that, the more kind of content and stuff that we have put together.
Yeah.
I was actually, did any of y'all see in the logo thread, there's somebody who did an entire brand treatment, not just a logo?
Yes.
There were a couple of those, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one that was incredibly extensive. It had variations as well as what posters would look like at conferences and stuff. It was pretty nuts.
Well, I don't know, because I feel like maybe in the spirit of people taking on different leads instead of maybe trying to take on everything, as a self-proclaimed hybrid designer, I'd be interested in at least coordinating those efforts. And I've been meaning to recruit the logo thread to start coming into our project as well. But I mean, even, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks early, we should be starting to think about, oh, this is the next logo if we're doing the cycling logo thing, and what's the website going to look like, once we start promoting that on the homepage, and what are some fun design things we could do around that. I'm definitely happy to take a coordinator / hands-on role with that. So probably a week out from being able to start playing with any designs or anything myself, but we have so much talent in that logo thread that I'm sure we can make something happen.
Yeah, I mean, I love the alternating logo thing, and I think it's a great idea. But after putting together all the social media stuff, I'm a little bit worried about it because certain logos in certain shapes don't work in different contexts for different pieces of social media, and then we've got to update all of these every time that we do another big release. It's just going to be kind of troublesome. So yeah, that may go a different direction.
How can we make it easier to have this meeting next time? So we played that Booble thing, or I forget the name of that website, but the thing that we used times.
Doodle, yeah. I mean, the Doodle thing worked once I actually figured out how that fucking Doodle thing works.
But then you kept deleting them. So
what?
Once you have a weekly, I mean, my thought is this will get easier once you do it on a weekly basis. You'll just block it out in your calendar.
Another thing too, I don't want to block work for this meeting. If people reach an easy consensus and things are just going, that we don't need to bring up everything that's happening in this meeting, right? Hopefully this meeting gets to the point where all we're talking about are contentious issues that people have disagreements about, which should be few and far between. So I'm hoping that we actually don't have to do it every week. But while we're getting so much done and revving so much, maybe it's good to have them every week.
Yeah, I think we could play it by ear based on how much activity there is, how much room for consensus there needs to be. As long as I think we have a minimum time duration of when we're willing to space them out, like no more than every third week should we do this. But if there's enough topics building up, maybe we aim to do it sooner and announce it, I don't know, at least half a week in advance or something.
Cool.
Yeah, it seems like we should probably have a meeting next week and maybe the week after, but after that, like, depending on how much work is going on in this site and how much actually needs to be discussed, I think like every other week should be fine.
Agreed.
Random tangent question. What time zones are everybody in? We got a little bit of that feedback on the thread, but I don't think everyone chipped in.
Pacific.
Eastern.
Mountain.
Eastern.
I'm usually Pacific, but right now I'm Eastern, actually.
So everyone's in North America?
Except you, I think.
Well, I'll be next week. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm North American, but living in Europe, so yeah.
Cool. So in that vein, is there somebody who would like to take over the facilitator role of like running this and getting all the GitHub issues together and all that kind of stuff for the website? And I'd like it to be somebody with some build experience, as we're mainly doing build stuff right now, and then later we can maybe shift it to somebody with more design experience if we want, as design becomes the focus.
I'd be okay taking over or I would also elect Sean. He's been pretty active with the issues so far.
I might take you up on that offer eventually, but I'm too much on the road over the next few weeks that it probably wouldn't be the best for me to jump in at this point, but number 2 or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I want to take on like a driving force role in this project where I'm like the main person behind it, so.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we could do interim or rotational owners or whatever, because by mid-February I'll be settled back in and stuff.
It's actually a really good thing to rotate out the role like as often as possible, because it can burn people out. Like, and also like as more people take on the role and then leave it, you grow more empathy for whoever is taking it on at that time. So, all right. So let's start with Trent then. You can run the next one. I'll mention it on all that stuff, and I'll also let the TC know. I'll handle the update in the main io.js TC this week, and then potentially might bring whoever happens to be the facilitator later on. Cool. All right, all done. Good job, guys.
See ya.
Good seeing y'all.
Good to meet you guys.
Take it easy, guys.